When I was a lad in my very early teens, my mum and dad bought a static caravan and they put it on a site in West Witton called Chantry Caravan Site. And I think it's still there. Now, West Witton's about a 6-mile ride from Laban heading towards Hawes. And on our way to the site, we'd always stop off at Laban to get some last-minute shopping in before we went onto the caravan. A ritual that became habit-forming for me because whenever I visit the Yorkshire Dales, this is always a spot where I stop for a comfort break before continuing into the Dales. It's a busy but still in its own way picturesque little market town. Its one claim to fame being that this was the home of James Herriot during the 1940s and 1950s, and the setting for all of his books and resulting TV programmes and films. Although it is worth mentioning that in the books and the films he used fictitious place names. I don't think Laban was ever actually mentioned. Now, this caravan was a sort of a retirement present from my parents to my parents, and for a few years every spare weekend I had there would be up there just relaxing, and obviously I'd often go with them. Now, generally speaking, you visit the Yorkshire Dales for peace, quiet and atmosphere, not for hustle and bustle. And once at the caravan site, for a 13 or 14 year old lad, there wasn't an awful lot to do. So I'd go for walks. I would spend the entire day walking the hills and the dales surrounding the caravan site, discovering and exploring places you just couldn't really get to with a car. Now, at the back of the campsite there was a hill called Penn Hill, that's Penn. It was a long and very steep climb from the campsite. Desolate but beautiful countryside. And when you reached the top there was a vast expanse of moorland. And I think over a period of 3 or 4 years I must have explored every conceivable route either from the campsite or from West Witton to the summit of this hill. I don't think I've been back there since I was about 16 years old, and I decided that on this particular visit to the Yorkshire Dales I was going to go there again. But there was a sort of a double reason for it. Where I live it's very flat, and I remembered one particular route from West Witton on a single tracked very steep road, much of it 1 in 4 gradients with more than its fair share of hairpin bends. A very challenging environment for any motor vehicle. And I was interested to see how the Interceptor would cope with this sort of terrain. I didn't doubt that it could do it, I just wanted to see how it would perform. Now, on this particular route you turn left just before West Witton. It's an unclassified road, a single tracked road that takes you up the hillside through fields and wooded areas that are really only suitable for tractors and 4-wheel drives before finally spitting you out on a moorland plateau near to the top. These roads are basically just converted farm tracks, the meandering nature dictated by ancient land boundaries. Video never gives a true indication of just how steep these roads are. Tight twists and turns which often dictate you have to slow down to a walking pace in order to safely negotiate them, meaning that first and second gear are the order of the day. I think the highest gear I was able to achieve on this little run was 3rd gear, because there's just not enough straight road to get a full-on charge to achieve higher gears. Now, I just want to take this opportunity to discuss camera work, because it's going for a lot of criticism in one of my last videos. Generally speaking, making any video I'll utilise 3 different cameras for different purposes. My main camera for doing all my footwork, my drone, which is a DJI Mavic Pro 2, and my DJI action camera. Now, I shoot everything in D-Log so that I can colour correct all the different types of footage to make it look more or less the same throughout the duration of any given video. I also have to use manual exposure. Now, all cameras have auto exposure, but it's horrible. It's designed for casual use for consumer level video, but it destroys image quality. and makes colour correction very difficult, so to that end I use neutral density filters on all my cameras, and I have to decide on an average exposure level, a level that will preserve detail for the bulk of the footage. I also have to maintain the same shutter speed across all three cameras, as well as the same frame rate. Otherwise we encounter what are known as frame rate conflicts on the video. Something you see quite commonly even on TV these days with drone footage, where the picture will jump once a second, as the algorithms try to compensate for the frame differences between the different clips used. Now on this particular day, filming conditions, especially where the light was concerned, were really challenging. It was a cloudy and really windy day, which meant that one minute it was bright sunlight, the next minute it was overcast, and then to compound things even further, with this bike footage I'm often riding through wooded areas, so it goes very dark. On reflection I should maybe have used an ND32 filter instead of a 64, but it's not like I could go back and refilm all this. So it is what it is. And before anyone else mentions it, the sat-nav. Perhaps the view would have been better if it wasn't where it was, but that is where it was, because there's nowhere else to sight it on the handlebars. And perhaps if the position of the camera had been changed to a different position, the view would have been better. But it was positioned where it was positioned, and I couldn't change it because of all the camera equipment I was carrying on my back. So if your next movement was going to be to leave a comment complaining about the camera work, don't waste your time or mine. Now, I can't continue without mentioning the YSS suspension conversion that I did to this bike way back at the beginning of this year. I think to all intents and purposes the suspension has bedded in now, and it has made a huge difference, not just to the way the bike handles but also to long distance comfort. This YSS system is primarily designed for performance use, for track use, for racing, but there is enough versatility built into it that at the lower settings, that is a low preload settings and low damping settings, it not only retains far better handling qualities than the stock suspension, it also provides a far greater degree of long-term comfort. This particular trip consisted of just over, or well over, 300 miles in one day, something I don't think I would have managed on the stock setup. And that's a combination of almost 200 miles high-speed motorway riding, something that the Interceptor does extremely well, and 100 miles on the Yorkshire Dales bumpy, twisty roads, something that I'm satisfied the stock suspension would not have handled very well at all. For anyone who has any doubts, I can assure you with complete confidence, the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650 is a very competent long distance tourer. The bike handled these challenging roads and steep gradients with ease, the only hiccup being my occasional miscalculation in which gear was required. But the biggest and most welcoming surprise was on the descent, something that I will cover in the next video. Now, if you are up in this neck of the woods and you decide to make this little trip up the side of Penn Hill, you may want to be careful of horses. Along the way there is a racehorse and jockey training school, so there are a lot of young inexperienced horses and riders on the road, and the width of the road means there's not an awful lot of room for manoeuvre. This was for me quite literally a trip down memory lane. The human memory never ceases to amaze me. I did at one point make a wrong turn. I went straight up instead of turning right towards Penn Hill. But I quickly realised my mistake, remembering a time when I was about 15 when I did exactly the same thing on foot. And I was quickly able to correct my course, and it wasn't long before I started to see familiar landmarks, old abandoned stone buildings and farmhouses. It been almost 40 years since I was last here, but my memory was able to recall what were insignificant little landmarks and reassure me that I was still on the right course. Things that I'd not seen or even thought about since my last visit here all those years ago that just came rushing back to assist me. Now, my apologies for the erratic riding that you just saw there where I kept taking my hand off the handlebar. As we all know, a bumblebee in the face at 50 miles an hour is a particularly painful experience, but let me tell you this, a wasp down the front of your jacket at 30 miles an hour is even more upsetting, especially when he's very annoyed. I thought it was just any other insect at first when it hit me on the neck, but then it stung me all the way down from my neck to my chest, about 4 times in all. Such is the lot of the motorcyclist. Now, wasps aside, this is a really enjoyable ride. You finally emerge on the moors when you reach the top. There are plenty of places on this moorland for you to pull over and take in the view, and wow, what a view it is. Now, when you reach the top, there are panoramic views of Wensleydale. And for me, it never matters whether the sun's shining, whether it's overcast, or whether it's heavily raining. The view is always fantastic. It just takes on a different atmosphere. But remember, once it gets dark, in the immortal words of Brian Glover, never go on the moors. Now, as you look across the valley of Wensleydale, on the other side, in the distance, if you're lucky, you can just spot a large stone structure, Castle Bolton, one of the most intact castles in the British Isles. And that's where I'm going to be taking you on the next episode of this little journey of mine through the Yorkshire Dales. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. Seriously, it couldn't exist without you. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. And if you do subscribe, don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you can be informed whenever I upload a new video. I will of course be back on Friday with part 2, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.